before I introduce what looks like the Powerpuff Girls, we did not colour coordinate this on purpose. We're on primary colours, full spectrum of perspectives, and we're just super excited to be here today. And I just wanted to also thank the Festival of Debate for hosting this space, putting on this whole event throughout the month, and just allowing the platform and space for all these views to come to the fore. It's my first time in Sheffield. I just got here yesterday. Natasha, Fiona, I think your first time too, so amazing that it's welcoming all these views from across the country. You might have realised as well that John Alexander is not here tonight, so apologies on behalf of him, but feel free to walk out if you if you came here just for him. Housekeeping, the loos are upstairs, just one floor up, and also just to be aware that amongst the speakers we have some neurodiversity and ADHD and stuff, so if we do like pause and hesitate or seem to talk over one another, like just give us some grace. Thank you so much. So yeah, let's get started. So I'm Bella. I founded the Anti-Party movement from the Partygate scandal, which highlights the double standards of representative politics. Our approach is to separate politics from democracy because we believe that the greatest threat to democracy is the illusion that we live in one. Despite the name, I was actually part of a party once. In 2021, I ran for the London Assembly as first candidate for an independent party, calling for more devolution of power to the regions and decentralising power away from Westminster. Following this experience, I then took on a Masters in Digital Politics, where I developed my thinking further through my thesis, How Can Collective Intelligence Enhance Democracy?, focusing on citizens' assemblies and collective decision-making by the people, as well as how technologies such as AI can support this. But to empower citizens, we need to change the system, and this is going to be an overarching theme from this discussion today. Anti-Party is all about systems change. We want to challenge the two-party system as it's not fit for purpose, and it's not fit for purpose for decision-making or for representation. But as well as everyone in the room today, I think you're all, desperate for change. Some stats to show that we're not the only ones thinking this. A survey of 1 million people by Vote for Policy showed that when voting on policy preferences, the majority of people agreed with views held across 3 different political parties. So how are we supposed to narrow our votes down to just one? How does that represent our entire spectrum of diverse viewpoints? The Office for National Statistics also recently found out that only 12% of the British public said they trusted political parties. This was down from 20% the year before. And stats on the UK Gov website show that less than 1% of the population are members of a political party. So we may have voted for a party in the last election. Who here voted in elections recently? Great. But then how many of you are members of that political party as well? Actually paying the... Okay, so significantly less, right? So there are 2 main kinds of democracy. We live in a so-called representative system, but more direct approaches are starting to emerge. And this is why I'm very excited to introduce you to our speakers today. Fiona and Natasha, who have both respectively made waves in their communities on the ground, empowering people from the bottom up. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Fiona Barrows. Fiona is an independent town councillor in Frome from Somerset. She is the lead councillor for the Climate and Ecological Emergency Work Programme and is part of a project called Green and Healthy Frome, which last year received £1.7 million in funding for community-led climate and health action. Outside of being a councillor, she works freelance as a writer and strategist and is currently working with the ISWE Foundation on people-powered politicians, building a movement of politicians at all levels of government, from national MPs to local councillors, who are trying to fundamentally change our political system and shift more power to people and communities. Natasha Ereira-Guyer. Thank you. A beautiful last name that is just so too above me to pronounce, I'm afraid. Natasha is a founder director of Civil Society Consulting, a UK-wide non-profit. CSC wants health, equality and social cohesion and believes civil society, so charities, community groups, are the key to this. Its mission is to support, catalyse and empower civil society, particularly grassroots organisations led by and for marginalised communities, by providing affordable and free support. I was going to say transport there, I was like, that'd be great. That'd be brilliant. It's part of it, sure. Realising disconnection within and between communities is a root cause of all the problems they work on. CSC has a major initiative called 32 Steps to Togetherness, which we will hear more about in a second. And Natasha's academic background is extremely interdisciplinary, in evolutionary anthropology and behavioural science. She studied chimpanzees, as well as humans, either or, same. And that's very much the angle she'll be taking today. Prior to founding CSC, Natasha worked on an international development, United Nations in Rwanda, the Green Party, and for a peace-building think tank that measures and analyses social cohesion using Social Cohesion and Reconciliation Index score. So with that, an open question to the room, along with the theme of this event, and obviously anti-party and why we're all here. Why do we actually need political parties? We've taken it as is, we live in this two-party system, but what are the party machine and what do political parties actually do for us, or even politicians themselves, as you see members of Labour resigning over signing for the ceasefire in Gaza, and members of the Conservatives leaving because they disagreed on the party whip on Rwanda. So imagine a world without political parties, without elections and campaigning, and the distraction this causes people, and the distractions it causes the representatives themselves from doing their job. There is a real need to emphasise simplifying issues and making decisions for the people, regardless of ideology. And that's why Fiona, as an independent councillor, has such huge potential and has been doing such great work in her local communities for the last few years, but it hasn't been without challenges, has it, Fiona? So with that, I'll hand it over to Fiona to just sort of explain how she got to where she is today. And
is that on? Yeah. So I guess the first thing to say is that I say that I'm independent town councillor, which I am, but I am with Independence for Food, which some of you might have heard of. And I guess the sort of starting point, because I also sort of overheard a question, that was, it came about in 2011, and it was basically driven by the desire to take party politics out of local politics. I don't know how much everyone knows about local government and how it works, but there's basically sort of two levels. I don't want to get into too much detail. There's local authority level, where they actually have power, like Sheffield City Council, and then there's the town and parish level, where basically your only statutory responsibility is to provide allotments, which is great because I have an allotment and love them. But we've kind of created our own power. And so it came in 2011. A group of people met in a local pub and just decided, we need to do something about it. The town council was doing nothing. They weren't charging people very much, but it was just sort of bogged down in arguing and everything. And then they won just over the majority of seats in 2011, and then have held all 17 seats at then 2015, 2019. And they were contested. But then I was approached, because of talking about allotments, weirdly enough, by a current councillor on Instagram, saying, "You'd be quite good at this, do you want to be?" And I hadn't really thought about doing it. He sort of said, "Come and have a coffee," and I thought, okay, I may as well just apply. And I got through, and I read Peter McFadden wrote a book called Flat Pack Democracy, which I read. It just was a completely different way of doing politics. So the thing says that I would not be sat here if there was no other route into being a town councillor that involved being a member of a political party. I just wouldn't have done it, mainly because I can't have anyone telling me what to do. Wouldn't have done that. So I became a councillor and in 2022, but we weren't contested in all but one ward. So actually I was elected technically, but no one voted for me. So there's now sort of a bit of a sense of, has Independence for Food sort of become a victim of its own success, like it sort of set out to reinvigorate democracy, and and apparently early on, 60 odd people come to our town council meetings. We recently passed a £3 million precept with, I think, 3 people who aren't councillors in the room. That was it. So it's a difficult thing to say, because it's sort of the independence. We've managed to grow. The town council now has employed sort of 40 odd members of staff. As I said, budget of £3 million. We have done some amazing stuff, and I think that there is a lot that we can really look at in Freeman and say we've done it. And where we have been most effective is working with the communities, being a facilitator and enabler, not doing to but doing with. But it's at an interesting stage now, Independence for Froome, I think, as sort of what's next. And I'm definitely on the more radical side of things, of the councillors. We've kind of become status quo, which means that councillors people who want to sort of get elected and be, safely be elected, are kind of coming to Independence for Froome, and that means that there's maybe not quite the sort of the radical drive that there once was. What was the...
And it seems like the rise of independent candidates, or councillors, politicians, and elected independents have been increasing slowly. I think it's like 13% now across the country, but I would welcome anyone to try and find that out. I think there is a reason to hide that stat.
It's 13% at what I can find at local authority level, but finding that out for town and parish, I spent about half an hour this afternoon on my laptop trying to find that figure out, and I couldn't.
And the turnout stats as well.
I couldn't find turnout stats either for the last local election, which is worrying. But it's just so that the difference is, and where it has been good, is that the question that I always think is, when making a decision, is what is best for Froome? Like, what is like the best thing to do here? And I have at times voted against, like ideologically I might have been on the other side of things. You know, I won't say I don't belong to any other political party, but, you know, generally to the left of things, generally, you know, Green, that sort of area. And I have occasionally voted in a way that maybe wouldn't align with that, because, namely because normally we haven't done any engagement, and I sort of refuse to vote for anything where we haven't actually, like, asked people what they would like. But it's, so it's sort of, it has definitely had a positive impact.
And I think it's really helpful as well for the room to also just hear, you know, what your sort of day-to-day role looks like and how hard you really work, and also for how hard you work for so little is shocking for people that anyone who works in sort of private sector or, you know, corporates and things. It's crazy that people standing up for other people are. So
town and parish councillors aren't paid normally. In my first year I got through councillor allowances, which was a massive thing to get through, but it's £1,240 a year. I work on average 15 hours a week, so that is for the community, on top of trying to keep a roof over my head by doing paid work. So that's about £1.50 an hour, and that is sort of standard. Local authority councillors, I looked up Sheffield, their basic rate is 15,000, which is about the same as Somerset Council, and then there are extra things on top. So it is very badly paid, but today we had news that the last bank in Froome is going to close, so that came through the WhatsApp, and that's a big thing. It's a difficult role. Like, there's a lot of, you know, I sit in my local coffee shop on a Saturday because I am quite visible in the community and lots of people know me. I lead on the climate, and so I do speak at a lot of events, and, you know, people come up to me and will, you know, want to talk to me and want to sort of namely complain about stuff of which I have no control over. But, you know, sort of talking to them and trying to explain, well, actually you can, this is how you could do something about it. This is the person to email, this is what's happening here. You know, go for it. But it's it's a lot. I think we ask a lot from our politicians.
Absolutely.
And I'm not going to defend most of them. But
absolutely.
No, local councillors.
Exactly. So, you know, if only we had more local councillors like you. I wish I had one in my constituency in East London, for example. But I think, you know, that feeds into that broader point, right? Like, you're an independent councillor, you work so hard, you're doing such good work for the people in your community, but categorically, or like if you were to label your profession, you're still a politician, right? And that word has just got such bad rep these days. You know, people distrust politicians, it's a dirty word, blah blah, but clearly there are still some good politicians out there. So it's interesting just to pick apart that definition or that term politician and actually maybe still give it a glimmer of hope.
Yeah, we debated a lot when coming up with the name of people power politicians, because we know how people feel about politicians. Like, we know, but first of all, I'm a writer, so I love the alliteration, so I have to admit that was a big reason for keeping it. And secondly, ultimately, it is about sort of recognising that we need to, you know, in my view, politicians basically are community decision makers, or that's what they should be anyway. That's sort of what I see myself as, a community decision maker, and I try and make those decisions as collectively and participatory as possible within, you know, the limitations of the status quo and the system we're working in. But it is a difficult. And I think sometimes you do get sort of bundled all together. And the amount of times on Facebook, in our Froome Facebook group, I'm sure you have a Sheffield one, or there'll be lots of them. You know, it's the council, and they just start going off about something like, okay, well, first of all, which council are you talking about? There's two. There's Somerset and there's Froome Town Council, very different. And then it's actually sort of like trying to unpick it. But there is a real sort of, I've had to get a second phone, or get a new phone and keep my old phone for council work, because aggression from other councillors and members of the community sometimes about stuff. I don't handle it particularly well, to be honest. And also I would say that, yes, independence has got rid of some stuff, but also I've had a particularly difficult couple of months, and, you know, even outside of party politics there is still sexism and ageism and unconscious bias of things that you just wouldn't believe. Like the councillor WhatsApp group, someone asks a question, I'm known as like the annoying detail person amongst councillors. I'll answer it, and they'll go, no, you're not right. I'll say again, no, it's in the standing orders, no. Then older male councillor comes in and says exactly what I've said. Oh yeah, thank you. So frustrating. So yeah,
you know, that's something that maybe an AI moderator or bot in these WhatsApp groups, especially in the digital sphere, can maybe help to moderate. So, you know, you as humans and us as people don't have to deal with those personal attacks that can affect our emotions and our energy. You know, so when we talk about community decision making, collective decision making, and this leads into the citizen assembly work, collective intelligence, which is my research thesis, but it all goes back to that human need to actually engage with each other and, connect. And this is why I'm really excited to introduce Natasha's project through your civil society consulting called 32 Steps of Togetherness, which is a community-led sort of guide framework which fills the gap that is lacking so much in our society today. But would you like to talk a bit more about how that came about?
Shall I tell the genesis story? So, hello everybody, nice to see you all, meet you all. So, yes, we focus on health, equality and cohesion, and we have 2 streams of work where we're doing affordable support and free support, that's specifically for grassroots organisations. And essentially we were commissioned, and we're very delighted to be commissioned, to develop this loneliness training programme, trying to turn all of the academic literature about loneliness into something really accessible and practical that grassroots organisations or kind of anyone could use to develop initiatives to reduce loneliness. So we had loneliness as a health issue, like on our brains, and you know how it is when you're kind of completely immersed in something. We're like little loneliness experts. And as we were really coming to understand like the symptoms of loneliness, which are health issues, they affect your mental health a lot, and it leads to all of these other issues. But one or a few of the symptoms of loneliness actually kind of really pave the way for social division. So when you feel lonely, you feel quite distrusting of other people, irritable, resentful. Not always, by the way, but these can be some of the symptoms of loneliness. And essentially kind of hypersensitive to social rejection, and therefore maybe a bit paranoid. So when you're experiencing those symptoms, you're obviously very susceptible to divisive narratives. So when we live in a society where we've got widespread loneliness, it kind of creates the perfect conditions for divisive narratives to thrive. Yes. So in this way we kind of really made the connection between loneliness and isolation on a kind of individual level, and then social fragmentation at the community level. And we thought we don't like these things, so we developed, actually it's under your bums, 32 steps that you can take as individuals or as community leaders to connect with your community and reduce your own feelings of loneliness and isolation, and then kind of build up maybe to connecting with people different from you. So it kind of takes you on a journey, and then connecting to politics as well, because once we're connected and we're sort of enriched as individuals and then connected with other people, we're obviously more empowered. And we had these 2 arms of work. So I was kind of stressing, oh my God, now we've got a 3rd arm, we're only like, a team of 12, and we're already trying to work across the UK. So I was like, how are we going to have 3 arms? But then, fortunately, it kind of actually made sense why we ended up focusing on this so much. Because we kind of realised, or I had a big aha moment, where it's like, everything that we work on under health, equality and cohesion, when you treat, whether it's kind of like maternal mental health or youth violence, when you trace back that issue back to its root causes, somewhere in the root causes you have the loss of connection and the loss of community in there as part of a root cause. And I guess I feel like I'm amongst friends to sort of shit talk capitalism. And I think capitalism is really capitalism breaks down communities and isolates individuals. That's the truth of it. So we, I guess, kind of conveniently as an organisation, we were like, right, okay, this isn't a 3rd arm at all. Connection and community is like the underbelly of everything that we do. And I kind of feel like, I challenge you to take an issue under those 3 areas that doesn't come back to loss of community and connection. And I think there's kind of 2 reasons for that. One is our evolutionary history, like we evolved in communities, so we feel lonely without them, we feel a loss of belonging without them, and we maybe need to find purpose elsewhere. And also I think relationships and families can break down because you thought you were having children and having this wider community of support, and then you don't have it. It puts more pressure on family units. But then, and that's kind of my background, right, the evolution and the chimpanzees. But then where we've come to connect a lot is about how you really need to come together with your community to collaborate and find solutions. And you get the tragedy of the commons when you don't. The tragedy of the commons wins if you're not connected to the people around you, because you don't trust them. How do you know your neighbour's recycling? Why would I bother recycling? But also because you need to come together to feel empowered. So 32 steps to togetherness is this solution to everything, if only we were to kind of all follow it. And I guess we realised the links with looking at how we could move away from a political system. It feels like you've kind of got two options of like we either need to evolve into a new political system, or it needs to be a bit of a revolution. And as I see it, the benefits of or the drawbacks of evolution is that you're kind of constrained by the history, the historical way that you've done things, because you can only mutate so much away from that, right? A bit like, probably all remember how hands evolved when you studied it in biology and things. You're kind of constrained in that sense. And then with revolution, you've got, you're working with like no mental blueprint, and it's a bit scary because you're just going to, maybe we can find this optimum solution, but we don't know what it looks like, and how do you get everybody to rally behind that? So I feel like kind of no matter which route you want to take, reconnecting with communities is going to be a really key prerequisite, because if you're going to evolve, you're going to need that to like lead you towards that point. And if you're going to revolt, or I'm not advocating for revolution, but if you're going to think of trying to reimagine things a bit more radically, you need to connect to kind of develop those ideas and that shared imagination about how that might look.
Absolutely. And what I loved about 32 Steps to Togetherness is that, it is a blueprint for a social revolution in a way. When we
don't tell our funders that.
We'll cut that out and record it.
But yeah, a social and cultural revolution, not a political one.
Because we grow up in a punishment-based disciplinary system, right? We get told what not to do and how we're going to get punished for that, as opposed to a values-driven, life and future. And we don't. When do we learn at school nowadays? Like, help the old lady across the road. That's just something we've got to pick up from Disney films. And when was the last time any of us here did a sort of values-based exercise to actually see us personally, what values are driving our everyday decisions and our lives and how we want to live them? So that's why something like 32 Steps to Togetherness is just such a great intervention, really, for social cohesion.
Yes, and follow us on Instagram, because we're sharing lots of stories of togetherness from across the UK. So it's Steps to Togetherness on Instagram.
Nice. Yeah, we'll do all the handles, and we have a follow-up email as well. But I think what that touches on is these wider themes of disconnection, right? And we're still recovering from the COVID pandemic, and then the mental health pandemic that came out from that. So loneliness linked to COVID, we were all told to shut down, socially distance. It's no wonder that people start to feel lonely, and I'm sure you've heard the stat that loneliness is more deadly than a pack of cigarettes. Like, that's a scientific stat. And when we talk about connection, I'm sure you've heard about that Harvard study, which was like 75 years long, one of the longest studies on human lives ever made, to find that connection was the key to human happiness and flourishing. That was what came out of it, connection. It's also a value of ANTIPARTY. So connection, and everyone in this room now coming together for this topic. How can we reimagine a new system where we're all connected, but driven by these values such as 32 Steps, and not just driving right into a social network where, as you can see, as Fiona's even seen in her constituency, online people are letting go their sort of moods and emotions on the digital sphere. We need to do that inner work first before we show up in society and in our communities. Please go ahead, Fiona.
I was just going to pick up on what you said, because as we had a conversation about this previously, but I really like what you said about, you said sort of previously that actually it's a sort of the economic system, you said sort of capitalism, that sort of produces a fertile ground for the political system to create that division. And I think it was just a different way of looking at it, because for me, if we go back to the original question about sort of political parties, is that the whole, it's the divisiveness and the fragmentation, the polarisation of our society that I get so worried about. Like, that's the thing that I lay awake at night thinking about, that and the apathy and the sort of the lack of people engaging in it. And there is, and it's absolutely 100% at the door of a lot of politicians, and I would say it's actually sort of our political system rather than necessarily the individual politicians. But I just think that the whole two parties, it's designed for one party to always be in opposition. So one party to always shoot down whatever idea anyone says, to always pick the holes in something, to always sort of, make a personal jab at it. And I think where I really see the sort of the real impetus now for changing our political system is that we have to make some really big decisions now, particularly around climate change, but around other massive issues that are affecting all of us. And we have to deal with some really gnarly, difficult issues that have just become completely polarised and completely separated, and I just cannot see how we make those decisions in our current political system. I can't imagine the answer to climate change being in the House of Commons with them all like going like that on the desk and stamping their feet and lounging down. Like, they're not going to come. They're not going to make. And we're at that stage now where we really need to make these decisions. They have to be made, and we have to. There was More in Common recently did a bit of research on people's attitudes to climate, and they came actually across the board, and they group people into 7 segments. Have you seen anything about this? It's so interesting. So you have like, I would be a progressive activist. You know, then you also have sort of the traditional something or other. You have like, so everyone's like, they represent basically everyone, and across the board, everyone wanted more action on climate. But the only thing they say is it has to be fair. Like the policies and everything that comes out, it just has to be fair. And it's not. You're not going to get that in our current political system. So that is where I think sort of alternative systems like citizens' assemblies, you know, they have been shown to be able to sort of find solutions and find those, you know. The solutions we need are not on either side. They're not on the poles. They're in the middle. They're sort of they're a whole new solution that we need, and we're just not finding them. And that really worries me now, because I just think that's our political system. We're not able to make the decisions that we need to make.
So, hence, yes, collective decision making, drawing on the collective intelligence of the people in citizens' assemblies. This is something I've been researching heavily. I'm not sure. Do you have any views on citizens' assemblies as the way forward potentially, and 32 steps potentially encouraging and supporting people by nurturing them inside to actually then enter these forums?
Yeah, I actually think Fiona's probably got more say on citizens' assemblies than me, but I've got one small thought about how, I guess when we developed 32 Steps to Togetherness, and it came out of, by the way, it came out of John Yates' book Fractured, and then kind of looking at how to distill those steps down so that they're kind of more applicable for people everywhere in society, not just people maybe coming from a place of privilege. And we did that really co-productively with grassroots organisations that we work with from all sorts of different pockets of the country. And I guess as we were developing them, they kind of take you on a journey that you build up you reduce your own feelings of loneliness, connect more with your community, and connect more with difference, and then come to be more political. But I think as I've realised, and probably as things have changed around us, a lot of people actually come in with the last 4 steps about getting political, because you know things are so politically charged. And I guess I've realised how much actually politics has the power to connect us. So I think there's something really nice and circular there with citizens' assemblies. My initial concern is I think, and it's on my notes, like one of the big issues with political parties is that they're very top down, and there are so many issues with that. Which shall I go into? I don't know. That I think you know when things are top down, you don't really have time to look at like the nuances of the specific needs of, let's say, like different geographical communities, and also the different strengths in those communities to resolve those issues. And it kind of I'm also a big believer in it. So you end up wasting a lot of resources, right? Because you have to map all these things, come up with all this strategy and policy, when actually when you're at ground level or you're at the bottom, the solutions are often quite obvious. So there's like a lot of wastage, and I guess that's kind of why when I was planning and organising my thoughts in response to this question, I think political parties in their current form are bad is because they're so top down, and they're intrinsically linked with like a very top down way of running a society. So I think my only concern with citizens' assemblies is I haven't been fully convinced as to how they really move towards being more bottom up. It seems to increase the linkage between the bottom, it's not the right word, but you know what I mean, the bottom and the top, which is lovely, there's more information transfer, but does it really, it would be much nicer if you actually empower units of people to at that local level. And I guess I see a lot of power in, if we had a really rich and supported civil society, you maybe wouldn't need citizens' assemblies.
Absolutely, and it goes back down to like, you know, decentralising, devolving into, you know, these local councils that we know what's best for our area, and so does the representative of that specific area, and that's why there's a difference between local councillor politicians and then the higher up ones like Rishi Sunak that didn't even live in York, which was his constituency. Yeah, I think it's interesting that we've had this conversation, and I think that I do agree, and I think that there is,
I do sort of agree with what you're saying, and I also don't, because, and I think that's also a very healthy thing to say, by the way, that we don't have enough in our politics of saying, I don't actually know. And I say it sometimes in council meetings, everyone's like, what's she saying now? But to me, the thing about citizen assembly is, especially when they're done properly, so proper citizen assembly with sortition, which is very expensive at the moment to do, is that they are properly representative. And you can come back to what I said about climate change and fairness, is that they're done through sortition, they're random, so it's not the people who sort of, like me think, I could do this, and, think they're quite good at this. You don't get the sort of people who think, I can make decisions on behalf of the people, I know what's best for the people of Frome. You don't. You get people who are random who are being told they're taken through a process in terms of information, which I think is really important. So take on a whole process in terms of being educated about an issue, being exposed to lots and lots of different opinions. They're paid for their time properly, which is a massive barrier to participation in decision making. And when they're done properly, they're very hard to argue against. Like, they really do produce a mandate. You can't argue with that. And when I come back to these bigger decisions we have to make, for example, a progressive tax on flights is something that's sort of been mentioned a lot, as something that we probably need to do. If the groups can make those, and they have shown in climate specifically to make really bold decisions, then that is something that can. I really believe in them, but I also don't. I also love the idea of as well. And we probably should ask.
Yeah, and I think it's just. I mean, I don't. Citizen assembly case studies are much abound in the rest of Europe, and linking to the point about connection amongst individuals, there are, boiling it down specifically to, say, the Irish Assembly, where it was actually shown that, on same-sex marriage, for example, you had, someone going in from their world, from their own perspective, really, homophobic, against same-sex marriage completely. But then when he was sat opposite the table to someone else who was gay, who wanted to be able to marry his partner, his perspective changed, and that came through that connection and that in-person connection, communication, and this is something that we want to hold on to. But also, as citizen assemblies and collective decision making start moving more online, this is something like I'm trying to do in my research too. How can we retain that human connection as we start going online platforms, metaverse, etc. So there's a lot of angles and things we need to solve at the same time, and that's why. Did you have something to say about this?
There was something that we said at the beginning, but it popped in my head and popped out.
And about representation as well, to point around citizen assemblies being representative, that's a key point too, because they are selected to be representative, unlike...
Yes, I don't want to anticipate a question that I know that's come in, but I guess if you're talking about sort of voting or making decisions, so voting as a citizen or making decisions as a politician, that aren't just acting in your own interests. I think connection with a more diverse range of people is really key for that, because as soon as you meet with somebody, it's like this. And I think after many years of living in quite a divided society, you can really feel it when you meet with somebody who you're worried might judge you in a certain way, and you find it's so healing as soon as you come together and you immediately do exchange ideas and perspectives and soften. So I think having a more diverse social network is kind of quite a political decision, because it changes how you yourself will then vote. Exactly. So I'm just adding really to what you're saying there.
And a couple of people actually wrote in, good chance to say, unless you had something...
No, go for it.
We had a few people write in about, when we tried to reimagine this new system of community engagement and empowerment and collective action. So Jason Lemon, or Lehman, I don't know if they're in the room.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much.
You studied us.
I can.
Well, I was going to read it out unless you want to...
Yeah, I can't remember what I wrote.
Sure. So Jason said, I studied independence for Frome, IFF, and residence for Uttlesford, R4U, for my PhD. R4U were an independent local party who took over their town and then district council, mainly trying to change how planning and development was done, but other things like the environment as well. They have faced challenges but have been very successful in keeping control of the council and have been popular at the polls. To be successful, they needed a few capable people with a lot of time and commitment who led things and shaped the party along with broader support.
Yeah, which is the importance of leadership, I guess, and I guess puts into the kind of question of this balance between the non-hierarchical, everyone is equal and working together, and that kind of collective intelligence, but also the importance of some people being leaders and taking, making that investment and that personal investment. And there's a tension there which I'm not sure is necessarily resolvable, but I do think we kind of need both.
Well, that's a great example. Thank you so much for sharing that, with us here and with the wider community. And we've also got something in from Misha. I don't know if they're here. Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah.
So I've seen and been a part of lots of community self-organising as part of the community union model through Community Union Acorn. For instance, in Burngreave, the second most deprived ward in Sheffield, residents are getting organised to demand the council turn a local building into a community centre. People are running campaigns like this through Acorn and local community groups around the country on issues from transport to housing. Amazing. Acorn sounds amazing.
Sounds great.
Yeah, it's great to hear. I think we get how much power we sometimes do have when we do get together and get organised. And it's all well and good saying, they've got the power, we've got the people. But when we do get organised, we can really
people power.
I think the thing that we forget is no individual actually has power. We give people power. Like, we give people power by voting for them, and we also give them power by buying their things from their crappy platforms, whatever it is. Like, we give people power. Like, the collective has power. Individuals don't have power. We give it to them, and obviously it's part of the system. But we give it to these people in Westminster to go and make decisions for us on our behalf. That's not. We actually do have power ourselves.
I don't know if I quite agree with that, because I just think when often, like, the big barrier to change, my brain always comes back to is the press in our country.
Yeah.
And I, as an evolutionary anthropologist, don't really believe in true free will. There's always, there's so much. We are the product of our experiences. So I don't want to alienate anyone by saying that. We do have kind of free will, but like there's, so with that, I think like that I want to agree with you, but I do think that the system is the power is so deeply concentrated. It's only somewhat true. It's what I would feel, but I love it.
I think it comes. Yeah, it's our political system, and where people power politicians came from was. Essentially, it is sort of almost the next stage of flat pack democracy in many ways, which is the sort of the movement that came out of Independence for Freedom, and I'm presuming also may have been involved in that, is that rather than, as an independent council, I got no training, zero, nothing. And I've been asking for facilitation training for 2 years because I'm suddenly having to facilitate quite tricky meetings, and I've never had to do it before. And there are mainly councillors, I'll be honest, like local councillors at both town, parish and a local authority level, who are genuinely trying to change things. Like, I spent the last few months sort of reaching out to people and talking to them, and I'm not saying it's a majority anywhere near. I'm also not going to put. My dad loves to make up percentages. I'm not going to do it. He would always say 90% of people think that. And I'm like, how do you? No, there is a group, there is a movement of ours of people who have got in because they do want to change things. They want to do things differently. They want to shift. I sound really arrogant when I say this, but be Trojan horses, right? Like, get in and blow it open and change it from the inside out. And I think we need change from the outside. So all of this sort of community organising is amazing. But I do think sometimes we forget that also where the power and decision making currently is, and the money is in the legacy system, it is in the old system, and we need people to stand and to be the first guard, to make it, to open it up for more people, and to try and change it from within, and then hopefully the change from without and the change from within will kind of like come together. And we'll actually get somewhere.
So I don't blame you for thinking that. And this is something people have been messaging in about ANTIPARTY, just being like, oh, ANTIPARTY, you must be a registered party, you must be putting people for election across the country and hoping to change the system from within. But actually, no. And actually, my background, I used to work for KPMG, so I used to work in finance, professional services, and I knew going in, aged 18, banks, finance, it's this like evil, and I always thought, well, I'm going to change that capitalist system from the inside out, and it didn't work. I got burnt out, spat out, and well, here I am. It's all meant to be. Do you have one more thing to say, Natasha? Then I'm going to bring in a surprise speaker.
Yeah, I was just going to backtrack a little bit, because I think the part that I really do obviously agree with is the part of us having power when we come together. So I think what you were referring to earlier, which was my realisation of how the economic system creates, loneliness and disconnection and on a kind of individual level, and then the political system, it creates the perfect conditions for divisive politics, and the political system then feeds off that. So part of why the power is distributed the way it is because it succeeds in breaking down communities and breaking down the links between communities of different identities, different geographies. So I do very much agree with that aspect of we've got so much more power when we come together. It's realising that. And that's why it's so weird, because this came out of like a cute little let's all be kinder and more connected initiative, and actually when you really think about what it means, it's very political to come together and talk about togetherness, and there probably are quite a lot of people out there that wouldn't really want that to happen. And there's not that many, but you know, the people at the top.
Exactly. Well, before we launch into Q&A, there's been so many issues and themes like hovering around the room. I'm sure we've got lots of questions about, changing the system from within or from the outside, or do we need a balance of both? But we have a very special someone here today that's come all the way from Hull, Patrick from Cooperation Hull. Hello. He's got really
Shall
I would love to hear from you, like how. Sure, come here. Do you want my chair?
Oh, no, there's a chair here.
People's assemblies and we'll stand really.
Hi, my name's Patrick, and I've come all the way from Hull. And there's some leaflets that I've got here, and they say the revolution starts in Hull. So, basically.
Is that some food?
Well, actually, yeah, since then we've kind of gone back on that, and we're like, the revolution's going to happen in Hull, but it wouldn't be much of a revolution if it's already started, you know what I mean? It started in the global south, and it started 500 years ago, and so but yeah, anyway, basically what we do is we run people's assemblies, which, to our mind are like the intersection between everything that's good about citizens' assemblies, but also like devolving that to the local level and having them be a form of participatory direct democracy that people can participate in with their neighbours on their street. So you're combining mutual aid groups, people supporting each other through food banks and all these other aspects of local democracy, with people making decisions for themselves without asking permission from the council or the government. And yeah, we're really, I'll say a little bit about some of the movements that we're inspired by. If anyone knows about Rojava in northeast Syria, where the Kurdish people live, they've developed a system called democratic confederalism, which is the idea is that you achieve, you have people's assemblies operating at the most local level, and then they send delegates, rather than representatives, to a citywide assembly, and then they can send delegates to a regional assembly, and then we can have a national, perhaps even a global assembly, where we all become citizens of Earth, and we're both a citizen of the world, because we're human, and we're more than human as well, we're part of an interspecies democracy, and also we're a citizen of the place that you live. And I think something about that perspective, the idea of a people's assembly as opposed to a citizens' assembly, is like the concept of citizenship is inherently alienating, and it's inherently around, what happens if you're a refugee or an asylum seeker? You're basically just like excluded from what a citizens' assembly would be because you haven't got citizenship, and to be honest, for me, democracy transcends those concepts. So yeah, basically we've been going for about a year. We've run 13 assemblies so far. Every time I say this, I said 10 earlier, then 12. I'm just making it up as I go along. But yeah, so we hold people's assemblies in all of the different postcodes of the city, and it's all sort of building up towards a citywide assembly that we're going to hold probably sometime in September or something, once we've really established ourselves.
Can I ask, do you do it through sortition, or is it just to
No, so this is something that's perhaps a weakness of a people's assembly comparative to a citizens' assembly, and this is why it's not a one size fits all solution, is because you get the people who show up, but the way that
do you want to explain what sortition is, because I reckon not everyone might know what sortition is.
So sortition is a process that is designed to be both random and representative. So you would have a sort of a group that would sort of look at the makeup of sort of an area. So if it was food, you'd say, okay, so there's X percentage of people are between the ages of 20 and 30, X number between the ages of 30 and 40, then there's X in this socio-economic background. You can also put in factors like, worries about climate change, etc. But you can basically create a sort of you create almost like a pie chart of this is kind of what Froome looks like, and then you try and mirror that, but it's random, so people get sent a letter in the post, or we're using email now, because that's maybe a bit more up to date, that then sort of invites them to participate. But it is an expensive process. I say at the moment because the Italy Foundation is actually working on a tool to make it much cheaper. I think I'm allowed to say that. They're also working on a global citizen assembly with the UN Climate Assembly. But it's an expensive process to go through, but that is what sort of makes
That
it really
ensures.
hard to argue with, because it is, like, local councils, they're not paid, I'm telling you now, well, I'm not going to make up a percentage again, but mainly they are retired white men, middle class white men, because they're the only people that have time to work. And I'm often, like, I will tell you some horror stories about how decisions are made. You know, I'm in a room and I'm arguing against somebody trying to say that, like, an amount is actually quite a lot of money for some people, and you've got someone on Zoom because they're flying to New York tomorrow to go on a cruise around the Caribbean saying, I don't think that's very much money at all. You know, it's not representative in any way, and that's where competition comes in. Sorry.
No, it's really helpful to make that distinction between people's assemblies and citizens' assemblies, and it sounds like expensive citizens' assembly but ensures representation, much more affordable, like efficient, get the ground running people's assembly, but maybe not because it's more self-selecting.
Can I answer to that? So the way that we respond to this basically is we put like so much energy into like making them accessible and to bringing people into them. So we offer people expenses to come in terms of like paying for their travel to be there, you know, and we just spend like for each assembly that we run like hours and hours and hours of door knocking, and leafleting and online campaigns, like actually reaching like people who otherwise are not the usual suspects, you know. And like we found that actually, like the vast majority of the people who come to our assemblies are like working class, like, you know, people who are coming to talk about like the cost of living crisis and how it impacts them and stuff.
Could you speak a bit more about that recent experience you had around election time? You know, you went and had this huge movement or push really to people's assemblies, and then there was like, you know, banners, and how was that whole experience?
Yeah, so, you know, it was the local elections the other day, and, you know, a lot of people feel that voting is a waste of time. You know, and a lot of people are like, scandalous, you know, like that people died for those rights, and it's true, and it's also, you know, that's how people feel, you know, on the street. You're talking to people, they're like, what's the fucking point? They're all as bad as each other, you know. And whether that's, you know, there are good politicians and stuff like that, but there is limits to what you can do within the system. So because it was local election day, we held 3 assemblies outside polling stations across the city that we did, you know, like we have a background in like the climate movement, so, you know, we're a bit like edgy and stuff, so we did some like banner drops across the city, you know, like people's assemblies now, 75% not at the polls, which is the 25% turnout in Hull for elections. Like, where is the legitimacy in that, you know? And so and then we held these assemblies where it's all about like free meals. Every event we do is like free food. There's a creche. It's like bringing people in to like talk to each other, you know. And yeah, it was good. You know, we had some really good assemblies. One of the ironies was is that we held these assemblies outside polling stations, but no one was there because nobody bothered to know. So next time. But, you know, usually we're not reactive to the dates set by the political system. You know, this was like, so in some ways it was a more negative campaign than we're used to, because it was more around that the current system's broken, try this instead. You know, not discouraging people from voting, but just saying, like, you voted, do you feel empowered? Do you feel like that's you done for the next 5 years? Like, you know, or do you, like, have more to say? Do you know, do you want to be involved in something, like, where you actually get to, you know, and the feedback that we get from people who come to these assemblies is transformative for them. You know, like, they're like, wow, I've never been listened to before. I've never had a chance to actually, you know, it actually really does break down that social isolation and bring people together. And then, you know, when you know, the basic format is people identify a problem, you know, like in the local area or something that's going on in the world, like climate change, or, you know, and then you like create a vision together for how we want things to be, and then we're like, all right, now what we're going to do to get there, you know, and like if it's a good one, the outcome, well, the first answer should be like hold more people's assemblies. You know, you've got to just keep doing it. And one of the things I've seen with like ways like Extinction Rebellion, for example, have held people's assemblies in the past, and then they do this whole participatory process, and then they get this great list of demands, and then they like march up to the council and then give it to them, and the council are like, cheers mate, yeah, and then do nothing. You know what I mean?
Fiona, are you holding to doing whatever People's Assembly comes up with? They've knocked on your door.
I mean, if I really want to get a citizen assembly improvement behind it, I really do. Like, I did start making some mad moves a couple of months ago on it. Then realised I'm a bit too mad and I needed to calm down. Yeah, I mean, it is just, I really believe in them, but there was a sort of a movement to sort of do people's assemblies improvement, but it started Peter McFadden's house and all sat around, we're drinking mint tea from his garden, someone was knitting. It was the same people who go to, so you don't know, Peter started Independence for Food, he's very well known, and we were never able to get it out of that. It sounds like you've done an amazing job, but it was never able to get out of that, like, the usual suspects bubble.
But even formal citizens' assemblies, like in France, for example, Macron actually officially accredited a citizens' assembly and promised verbally that everything that comes out of this, and it's all properly done, sortition, facilitated, obviously a big budget, and he promised that everything that comes out of that will be taken on board, but it wasn't. So after the whole process of months and months, and at the end, he cherry-picked what he wanted to take forward or not. So there are even examples with our neighbours where politicians or government promise to take on board the outcomes of an assembly. They don't actually have to, we're just relying on their word. But there are studies that also show getting involved in an assembly and just having your say, feeling like you're being heard, studies show that actually that already just improves your feelings of democracy and you just feel better for it anyway, regardless of whether it goes on to make policy. People just want to feel heard, and that links back to the connection, the loneliness point. And actually it does also feed into the so-called term or definition of empowerment per the OECD toolkit for citizen assemblies. They actually broke down what empowerment means, and it involves things like feeling heard, feeling included, learning from other people's perspectives.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in with a bit of a concern, I suppose, or I definitely don't want to sound doom and gloomy, but I think there is some long-term thinking to be done around it, because whilst in the short term and maybe the medium term you feel good that you felt heard, but when repeatedly you've been consulted on an issue and then nothing changes, I've spoken to a lot of, through our kind of affordable support work, we do like a lot of participatory research or co-producing solutions with communities, so say in the northeast and in Greater Manchester, and I think communities that have been like over consulted and asked, and then maybe communities come together and be like, we're gonna build a playground. What's the playground going to look like? And everyone's like, well, it's going to look amazing. It's going to look like this, and then nothing happens, and you have that with a wide range of issues again and again and again, and the trust really goes over
it's
time.
Already at rock bottom. So
I know, but maybe. Then it becomes harder. It becomes harder and harder to get people to participate if that's how they feel.
I think just want to say quickly, because that's so in the conversations I've been having with other councillors as part of People Power Politicians, like there's some real stories of that, and it's not often it's not down to the individual councillors. Like there are stories of sort of councillors who have done sort of engagement bit and like, great, they've said they want this, and then they're trying really hard to get it and they can't get it through, because of either being blocked by officers or by executive councillors, or just because the whole system is designed to maintain the status quo. So it's also, right, so I'm just saying, it's and that is then a real fear, and they say, well, we've done it, we've asked them, and we want to do it, and we can't. I feel like I'm sounding like I'm defending politicians, so I'm really not. I'm just saying there are a few, like there is a movement here, and if we can get more politicians in power who will say, yeah, I will listen to that citizen assembly, I will listen to those people's assemblies, I will do what they say, but it's also recognising that all of these, we're all working in a broken system. Like the system is just our planning system, don't get me started on that, that's my biggest bugbear at the moment. Like how planning works is completely top down. Councillors don't actually have any real power or any say over anything, and yet we all get, all local authority councils do get slaughtered the whole time for planning decisions. But your hands are tied most of the time.
We definitely need systems change.
Yeah.
Mind if so I just want to say like a couple of things about the empowerment thing and stuff. So one of the reasons we don't necessarily at the moment focus on tangible outcomes for assemblies is that we don't have the resource base to overpromise and then under-deliver, and we don't want to do that to people and break their trust like that. But one of the best examples of we held a people's assembly in a certain postcode in a community centre about how could we support each other more as a community, how could we build this connection and stuff like that, and a lot of it was around food and basically what came out of it was having a pay-as-you-feel meal every week in this community centre that's cooked with waste food from a supermarket. It's pay-as-you-feel, so people can pay nothing or they can pay a tenner. And so that's been going for 8 weeks now. It's become a democratic space, it's about where people just sit down with strangers and there's some nice music on and we do it all pretty and stuff. And then the other thing is about maybe just what I can envision the relationship between councillors and people's assemblies being, which is, for example, participatory budgeting, having a percentage of the budget be decided by People's Assembly is one way you can, have that relationship. Having councillors be, like, the candidates be chosen from a People's Assembly. A People's Assembly, like, nominates someone in their community who they believe is, like, will serve well, and they have, like, a, sort of, like, agreement written up that, like, I will, my job, is not to make decisions off my own back, like, off my own judgment, it is to enact the mandate of the People's Assembly, and then eventually, you stand some independence like you did, you win the whole council, and you just vote to, pass okay, now the People's Assembly is the, like, legitimate forum of democratic, and you just throw resources at it, and then actually you can start to hold assemblies on bigger topics like, okay, what we can do about housing and transport and stuff. But one thing I will say around People's Assemblies as a revolutionary angle and stuff is that we live in a time where our government is committing a genocide, is complicit in a genocide, and this whole system has been killing people for years, and it's killing people in this country, just through poverty, and people are fed up, and you're out there on an estate in Hull speaking to people, and they're saying to you, like, well, I just think we need a revolution, yeah, exactly, innit? So people are, like, a lot of people are there, like, you don't need, a lot of people who are suffering are more there than we are, but then they're like, it's never going to happen. How's it going to happen? Like,
Let's organise it.
Well,
We're not allowed to be out there.
Yeah, exactly. But so let's say a People's Assembly. Let's say you have a People's Assembly. You could decide, for example, that the citywide assembly, was going to, like, have a rent strike, organise a rent strike, and have, like, literally tens of thousands of people across the city agree. Well, if this many people stop paying their rent, stop paying their bills or whatever, then I will too. And then you organise eviction resistance campaigns to protect people, and that is, like, how you kick off a revolution, to my mind.
Similarly to that point, what if we all just don't vote at the general election? And we're like, we're not going to vote and give you our mandate unless you really show to us. I mean, we've got a 6-month leeway for them to, what if we started that movement now? But I agree, sometimes withholding so-called mandatory obligations of us as citizens is actually a good way of sparking some change or some revolution. So yeah, lots of ideas here. Question for the room maybe before we go into an open Q&A. Who here would be up for joining a People's Assembly in Sheffield if that just popped on the weekend? Nice. And then I guess follow on, slight distinction, who would be up for joining a Citizens' Assembly if their letter came through the door and said you've been chosen to join the Citizens' Assembly? Yeah, same, amazing.